Yeah, let's talk about the current moment. We're witnessing devastating wars in Gaza, Lebanon, and escalating tensions with Iran. From your perspective, what is the role of capitalism and Western imperialism in these conflicts? What are the real driving forces behind these events? Because with the internet, we hear a dozen different kind of stories.
Mhm.
Uh, I never use the words conspiracy theories. Uh, I mean, everybody got their own way of thinking. But I do see a lot of people have no grounding in what they actually are thinking, right? And yeah, you most of the time, what I see of you is, yeah, you always know how to articulate and you really think about things. So, what do you think that's going on?
Well, I agree with the sentiment that you expressed. This isn't just happening accidentally. Um, if every once in a while we got into a war, then maybe you can think, all right, maybe it's rooted in a bad luck of the draw and having a bad administration or a corrupt politician or something like that. But when it's all the time, when every administration, irrespective of what party they're in, does the same thing, maybe with different countries, but just replicates the
Yeah.
same playbook, violations of human rights, they're not democratic, they're threatening us, or terrorism, or they have weapons of mass destruction, or they're throwing babies out of their incubators and constructs this atrocity propaganda to pull on your heartstrings because Americans they're not soulless creatures. They care about people, and if you pull on their heartstrings hard enough, maybe they'll support things that if they actually knew what they were doing, they'd be disgusted with themselves for supporting. So it's not an accident. It's part of the system. And the question is, well, what system are we talking about? It's one of the more popular interpretations online now is that, oh, it's just the Jews. It's just the Jews, and
Yeah, that's
that's always been called the forget who was it specifically, but one of the very prominent socialists called it the socialism of fools. It's a socialism of fools because it's a form of fetishistic thinking. So you change the Jewish capitalists and you make them Anglo and now they're gonna stop being evil, or now the exploitation is gonna feel a little bit better because they're not Jewish or something. It's fetishistic
yeah,
thinking. It's ascribing properties to things or to specific groups and not to the relations that exist that make it so that any group can be in the same position. They're going to have to act in the same way because of the relations that the system, the positions that the system provides for them and the relations that surround it. So I think it's the capitalist system. And look, capitalism today doesn't necessarily look like how it did when Marx wrote Capital. It doesn't look like how it did when capitalism first developed. I think we are at, Lenin says at the beginning of the century, there's a new stage of capitalism called imperialism. It's monopoly capital, finance capital, etc. I think that stage gets even deepened. It gets deepened into a new stage of its own called super imperialism by the Marxist economist Michael Hudson, which basically makes the argument that in the aftermath of the Second World War, instead of having international finance capital, the word here international is very important, it's between nations. Now you have a global finance capital rooted in global financial institutions like the IMF and the World Bank, rooted in the reality of the dollar as the global reserve currency. Any country, in order to trade with other nations has to do it in the dollars in most cases, which means they have to actually produce things, sell them in order to obtain their dollars, and then go to the market, the global market with those dollars. What does the US have to do? It just has to print. It can just print money endlessly, and then it's able to get everything. So, what does imperialism look like today? It's that dollar hegemony. What country gets to go to the IMF and World Bank and tell it how it is? Is it Russia? Is it China? No, it's the US. Imperialism today is fundamentally unipolar. It's about the hegemonic power of American imperialism. And therefore, all of these wars to either expand the sphere of influence of US imperialism from the pariahs like Iran or Russia, etc., or to defend the sphere of influences that already exist, they're wars of empire. And this is not just an abstract imperialism, it's the imperialism which is capitalism taking a specific form today. It's capitalist super imperialism. So everything we're seeing in the Middle East, the proxy war against Russia, the inklings of a proxy war against China, the so-called Don Roll doctrine, and the attacks on Latin America, whether it's Venezuela or hopefully not, but incoming attacks on Cuba. It's all part of this larger imperial policy of defending the spheres of influence of the dominant capitalist, super imperialist power of our time, which is the United States, which is clearly in a state of decadence, right? Not just internally for the reasons that I outlined, and the people having no trust in their society and their government and the media or anything like that, but also globally, who actually believes the US anymore? No one, especially after the last 3 years, where the world has seen chronicled on their phone the most heinous crimes imaginable,
Yeah.
24/7 on our feed, the genocide in Palestine. And they've justified it, they have funded it, they themselves have carried it out, they've provided cover for it. So no one accepts their lies anymore, and we have a empire that is literally in decline. But empires in decline, become the most dangerous. It's like an animal that's about to die but threatened and is capable of throwing some good blows there at the end and doing some damage. And I think that's effectively where we're at, and that's rooted, of course, in the system. It's not if these people were rational from the standpoint not of capitalist instrumental rationality, but just what benefits human life, they would withdraw from all over the place, use what resources they have to improve the conditions of their people, create a smarter welfare state, a better welfare state, and do all these things. They can even sustain their power as a capitalist class, but just satisfy their people's needs and withdraw and just engage in good trade with the rest of the world. They can have maybe include themselves in the Belt and Road Initiative or in BRICS or something like that, and be a champion in this multipolar world.
Yeah,
But
that
they
is
can't.
it
Yeah, go
is
ahead.
it's actually what I learned in game theory. In game theory, it literally said if the countries or the governments just would do what is in the best interest of the people, all wars would cease to exist, and
Yeah,
everybody would have food. It's so simple and yet so hard to accomplish. But I hear you name always United States, but sometimes I feel like, is it really the United States or is it the people who are actually behind the government who
yeah, yeah, yeah,
almost
yeah.
own the government? Because I mean, I see that Americans are suffering also, right? So I just saw a video of a
The
woman
Epstein elite.
was crying because her was, what is it, $5 now,
Yeah, yeah,
gas.
yeah.
And then I think like, well, and then you see a clip of Trump. We have the oil. Well,
Mhm.
who's we?
Who's we? Yeah,
Who is
yeah,
we? Right?
yeah. Yeah, the American people are victims of the American empire. As one of my favorite political theorists, the American historian Michael Parenti, who just recently died, put it, the empire feeds off of the republic, and the American people are 100% victims of the system. When I use the United States, I mean that elite, which
Yeah.
in many ways isn't. They kind of are based in America, but they're not really American in the sense that they're not patriots. They represent no country. There's no country that they love or stand for. They just love and stand for capital. And if
Yeah.
tomorrow, there was another country that provided a better base for being the center of world capitalism, they would switch in a heartbeat. That's why, it's the global financial institutions. The American people have no sovereignty whatsoever. So, this framework, I hear a lot of geopolitical analysts, and um, they're very good at keeping up with an immense amount of details of all the unfolding events and telling you
Yeah.
what this means and what that means. But there's always a certain naivety that's involved in the fact that they're not looking at the system that's making this necessary. It's always like, if only they were smart and they would pull out and do this and do that, and we and America could have prosperity, be included in BRICS and do this, and let's focus the stuff at home. It's not just because Trump doesn't want to. It's not just because the ruling class doesn't want to. It's because the system necessitates in order to stay alive. in order to
Yeah.
not be threatened by alternative forms of life, it necessitates this irrational policy. It has to. America's never, insofar as it's the same ruling class, it's never going to do the rational thing that's good for the American people and the world. It's never going to withdraw its 800 military bases from around the world and focus on things at home. And insofar as we think that that is a possibility, while we have the same fundamental form of life, while we still have capitalism, we're going to be naive and disappointed every once in a while. We're going to be, there's people like Scott Ritter. I admire his analysis, or Jeffrey Sachs.
Yeah.
I admire his analysis. These are all great geopolitical commentators, but since they don't take into account capitalism, they think these are all choices that are made by states, and they're
Yeah.
bad choices and they should be making good choices. What if they're not choices? They're just what the system needs. And it has to appear as if it's a choice so that you don't question the system that makes it necessary in the first place, that strips choices from. You think Trump could do anything other than what he's doing?
No.
You think Biden could
No.
have done anything other than what it's doing? Of course not. It's
No.
just the system working itself out. And until we accept that, we look very naive and we talk about, no, Trump is going to be the pro-war but he sold it out and he sold his base. It's like maybe from the
Yeah.
standpoint of political propaganda to win people over, maybe that's useful, but it's incredibly naive for
It's
analysts.
it's extremely naive. I've talked with Americans and also here in the Netherlands of people. No, but he will change, right, in 2016. Okay, well, I don't know, uh, but when I look at the foreign policy of the United States, it's just in one line, right? Because I
Yeah,
focus a lot on China and the West, and I just see it doubling down, doubling down, doubling down all the way until now. So I talk with them and then I say, well, that's two different parties came to power with three different presidents, all doubling down on the same policies that the
yeah.
predecessors had. So how do you say there's something different between them? But yeah, sometimes people wake up, but most of the time they still will not see it. Yeah,
There was
it's
an African socialist leader that said America's a one-party
it's a one
dictatorship,
party. Yeah.
but with usual American extravagance of having two, having the pretension of there being two, but it's actually one. And yeah, that one is the representative of the system. That's why it's so important for us to try to break that two-party duopoly.
Yeah, I think they occupy it, right? So they
Mhm.
occupied the Congress and the Senate. So even if you become the president, well, try to
Yeah,
pass a law.
yeah,
You always will
yeah.
fail.
Mhm.
It's just you cannot win. I think they just fight for the biggest donations, right? Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
your party is winning or your president is winning, then you get a lot of more donations, and the next time it is for the other party, and to just share the wealth.
Mhm.
Yeah,
At the subjective level, this is one of the things where one of the big debates in the U.S. amongst dissidents is, does Israel influence the U.S. or is it the U.S. that controls Israel? Our position is very clear. I think Israel is a colonial outpost of
yeah.
American imperialism. It's an extension of that system.
It's
However,
it's a dog. It's the pit
yeah,
bull,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah,
However, at the level of, there's like the objective structures, but then there's also the subjects, the individuals. At the level of subjective allegiances, does it not help keeping politicians in line when APAC is shoving hundreds of thousands of
yeah,
dollars down their pockets and funding their campaigns, or maybe has blackmail on them, right? What was the whole Epstein uh, um, ring of PDFs and a bunch of degenerates? It's precisely that, a ring of blackmail. And that works at the subjective level, but it's one component of this larger system where it's very clear who who the center of power is.
yeah. I've had this discussion with people, and they say, well, they have the lobbies and this and that. I said, do you know what money that is? That is U.S. dollars. It comes from the
Yeah, yeah,
United
yeah.
States, given to them.
Mhm.
This is like a capo from the Italian mafia doing his kickback to the Don,
Yeah, yeah,
right? So
yeah.
they can all share the wealth of the
Mhm.
money that they gave them to, you know, do
Yep.
whatever it is that they're doing. But I also there just came a new theory. I'm not sure who brought it out. Is that maybe that this time the pit bull is getting a little bit. agitated with its own boss and is trying to, take over the
Yeah.
power or something. I haven't really looked into it. Have you ever thought about it, that maybe that is going on? Because it is clear that what now is going on is extremely and
Yeah.
very bad for the United States.
Well, the Israelis they like the position that they're in with regards to their relationship with the US, and they like the very small degree of sovereignty that they have. And they're threatened by any attempt to undermine or to try to delink the U.S. From Israel. So it is a dog, but it's like the good metaphor of the dog. Sometimes the dog, if you're having it do things that it doesn't want to do, or if you're not letting it do things that it wants to do, because again, there's people at the helms of these states that have their own subjective idiosyncrasies and their own ways of justifying things, right? I think the Zionists are nuts. They're absolutely nuts, and they actually want to carry out the extermination. They don't see Palestinians as humans. They see this
Yeah.
biblical ideology, or this theological justification. I think a lot of them buy it, and so at the subjective level, they want to do more than what the master is letting them do. And I think what could end up happening, this is what my prediction for the next PSYOP, the next psychological operation is going to be. America is just going to keep offloading a lot of the responsibility that it has in these crimes and in these actions off to Israel. And the next form of dissidence it's going to allow, it's going to be people like Joe Kent or like Tucker and all these right-wing commentators, right-wing populists who say it's actually not America. It's only America because America is controlled by Israel, and the problem is really Israel. Because then you're able to get back to a 0 point when you say, ah, okay, we have delinked ourselves from Israel. Now we can go back to being the good Americans and yada yada yada. And no, it's gonna just continue the policy. It's just that you're gonna externalize responsibility onto an entity that you were responsible for the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually, it's the people behind it, right?
Mhm.
A lot of times they always say it's the Zionists. I said, yeah, well, there are a lot of capitalists that are Zionists, but they're not all, right? And
Yeah,
it doesn't matter until the system, you can wipe them out, everybody, but as long as you keep on the system, there will be formed another group
yep.
with another group who have similar interests, and
It's
it
like a
will never
tree.
stop. Yeah,
You can cut the branches of a tree, but if you leave the tree intact, it's gonna regrow them in
yeah.
different ways.